Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. It's John Suntress. And man, it's been a while since I've had this guy on the podcast, and it's been a while since I've seen him. So thankfully, through the luckiness of video streaming, I'm able to see Jim Rugg. Welcome back, Jim.
Good to be back, John. Good to see you.
Man, I think the last time I saw you face to face might have been at Cincy Comic-Con, one of Tony Moore's shows. And I remember me, you, and maybe Ryan Brown talking shop and watching you guys, two guys who I think are amazing creators with your projects and getting the word out and stuff. And seriously, it was like, this is a lot of fun, just kind of being a fly on the wall, watching you guys, kind of compare notes.
It's an interesting name for you to bring up, John, because Ryan has kind of been my Kickstarter whisperer through this campaign.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's a small world, but I like Ryan a lot. I've known him for years, and I agree with you. Definitely a guy who's got a good head on his shoulders.
Well, again, I think you guys are innovative guys. You have interesting ideas, and certainly, God, Jim, your whole bibliography speaks to that. I mean, God, Street Angel and Aphrodisiac, and now Octobriana, I think is a fascinating subject and also format. Let's start with the format because I got a couple of years on you, and I'm one of those kids that during the blacklight art era was too young to probably be, tripping the way, older kids were and stuff. So I literally was probably like a 10 to 12-year-old kid just enjoying the art for art's sake and saying, wow, this stuff looks really cool. So what got you excited about doing it in this format?
That's pretty much my same response because, I associated in hindsight with the underground comics and head shops, but those are before my time. I just read about those. I would see them either online or at shows. Like Marvel had done those blacklight posters. So I would see those at comic book conventions and they looked really cool. And I make a lot of different stuff. Anybody that's unfamiliar with my work, I do drawings, I do screen prints. I just like making things, especially I see something I like and then I have to kind of like, let me try it. How do they do that? Yeah. And so, I had an opportunity to do a silkscreen print through Telegraph Comics and Art. And they said I could do whatever I wanted, metallic ink, fluorescent ink. And I realized like, that's how you make blacklight posters with fluorescent ink. And so I made one of those, I think it was in 2014. And whenever I got the prints back, I didn't print it myself. I just made the files and sent it off to the printer. When they showed up, I was just blown away by the colors. I had an idea what to expect, but it's so bright, those fluorescent inks. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, this would be great as a comic book. It would look so cool, to see a comic book with these colors. And, it sort of goes in my brain. I have notebooks of these kinds of harebrained schemes, half-baked ideas. And as time went on, I tend to do everything myself. You mentioned Aphrodisiac. I usually write and draw and color and basically get it even ready for press and sometimes even send it straight to the printer myself. So I know how to do color separations. I know how to use spot colors. And I just thought you could do this as a comic, like you could replace your CMY inks with fluorescent inks and you could do this. And so, I ran it by Chris Pitzer at At House Books, who knows a lot more about print than I do. And he seemed to think it made sense, the technical part. One thing with the fluorescent ink is you have to run it twice, which is a little bit different than a regular 4-color job. But, people do this. It's not unheard of for a printer to print essentially 7 colors. And we were off and running at that point. I just needed to find a story that fit, which brings me to Octobriana, because I was looking for something that would fit in the 70s, because, again, that's, the blacklight poster era.
Absolutely, man. And I remember those old Marvel posters, but you're right. This art, what you discovered from this Octobriana and everything is just fascinating. I'm going to throw up a couple of images right now. And you were very kind because look at that. There she is right there. That's beautiful, man. And I love that she's in front of the Coca-Cola sign. And I watched your Kayfabe conversation with Ed about the book that you discovered. Talk about this book, because honestly, this is a character I had never heard of. It's funny you said that she's been used by other comic creators as well, and other interesting people have been interested in the character. So give us the background on Octobriana.
The way I found her, I like weird comics. Again, anybody that follows me knows, I want to see something I haven't seen before. And so I got a hold of Paul Gravett, had written a book called The Leather Nun and Other Incredibly Strange Comics. And there were, I don't know, 50 comic books that were weird for some reason or another profiled in this book. And one of them was Octobriana. And, it's just like a one-page description, but it was enough to plant this idea of like, this is interesting. Let me try to track down the book, because it goes back to Octobriana and the Russian Underground, published in 1971 by Peter Sadecki. And it's a real book. It looks like a historical book. The edition I have is hardcover, 176 pages, mostly text with, a little bit of art here and there, but it details this Russian underground superhero character's history. And her history is that she's published illegally in Russia. She's created by these like young artists and intellectuals that are, she's a character to oppose the Soviet oppression, basically. And so patterned after Western superheroes of the 60s, it all lined up. Like, it's exactly, when I saw it, it just spoke to me. Because I often, when I did Aphrodisiac, I wanted to do a superhero comic, but I didn't want it to look like every other superhero comic. And that's kind of what Octobriana presents herself. When I'm reading through her book, it's like, oh, this is sort of perfect, because it's inspired by those superheroes. It's of that time period, but definitely its own flavor. And I was just blown away by the book. I've compared it to like Orson Welles' F for Fake or War of the Worlds, but also like Christopher Guest's movies. It just really feels like the author created a whole world in this book with this character. It turns out to be a hoax. The artwork in the book is stolen artwork. The author, he died in 1991, so I can't really speak to his character, but I mean, he stole this artwork from two well-known Czech artists, smuggled it out of the country, and in a way, it's kind of in line with a lot of American superhero comics history in that way, art being stolen by the artist and then published by somebody else. But the conceit of the character is that it's this public domain character. And so, as you said, other people have used it. There are other Octobriana comic books and books. One of the first one, Brian Talbot, did it in Luther Arkwright, his prototype, graphic novel.
Oh, yeah.
So it appears in different places. And a lot of people have written about the character. Trina Robbins, the great comics cartoonist and comics historian, has written about Octobriana several times and in different places. And like me, I think it captured their imagination, and then they went looking for answers, and you start to plug in the backstory and find out maybe it's not what the book says it is, but all the more entertaining.
100%. And once again, man, Jim, I'm so pleased the references you make to like F for Fake, one of my favorite Orson Welles weird little movies and stuff, and of course his War of the Worlds. Have you talked to Trina about this, or is that planned as maybe a future Kayfabe conversation?
I haven't talked to her. I have found a couple of things that she's written about the character, and my understanding is that she's written a couple of short comics with the character. So I need to track her down and talk to her about it. Quite frankly, this has all kind of happened quickly. So there are a few threads that I need to run down, and talking to Trina about the character is definitely on my list.
Well, as we say, it's a Kickstarter campaign. I'm going to throw up another great action image right now. Look at that. How about that, man? And can you imagine? I cannot wait to see this in the blacklight format, man. I mean, it already, these colors are so vivid and exciting to begin with. I literally, I haven't done it yet, but I was calling a buddy who has a couple blacklight posters. I'm like, do you have a black light? He's like, no. I said, I got to get on Amazon, man, and buy one of these things, because I'm totally going to support Jim's book, and I'm going to get these prints and everything, because that's the other thing, by the way. All right, so first of all, let's talk about, so you're doing the Kickstarter. You still got about 3 weeks left of the Kickstarter. Right. And, so when you say this all kind of came together, like, what are you saying in terms of the other, becoming aware of these other comic creators that have played with Octobriana, or what do you mean?
Yeah. I've been tracking down information. One of the stretch goals that I'm planning to do is an Octobriana checklist. And the reason is I thought I kind of knew about the character and what was going on. And Cartoonist Kayfabe, the YouTube channel that I make with Ed Piskor, we've done a couple of episodes now on the character. The first one being about the book, the original book. And we posted it, and people start filling in gaps and linking me to articles, to other comics appearances that I didn't know about. She was in 2000 AD.
Oh, wow.
For like a story arc. So,
oh, wow.
There's a lot more information with her than I realized. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the CIA and the FBI, and I've gotten one document so far about her from the CIA. So I'm trying to put together this information, like I was trying to think of what would be cool stretch goals, but also I like the idea of checklists. As a longtime comics fan, I love fanzines and fan history. And so checklists were often done for characters or for favorite creators, things like that. And this one's going to be both Octobriana, kind of the real life, magazine and newspaper articles, and then also, the comic book life, where she's appeared in different comics and books. And there are a lot more than I realized. So, a lot of that has come up just in the last couple of weeks. And I've been trying to keep it somewhat organized to make it easy for anybody else that's interested in the character, because like you say, I think the character is really interesting and she's not that well known. So this will be a resource for anybody that wants to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole.
Hilarious, man. I'm already looking. We get some good questions. I want to get people in the mix now. And as always, I have to switch from not having my glasses so I can actually read. So let's see. Gore Vidal, what does he say here? Brian Talbot read a newspaper review, Octobriana, and decided to include her in his multiverse classic, Luther Arkwright, which first appeared in Rare Mess. Yes, Gore, we were just talking about that.
I don't know if this is the article, but one of her early newspaper appearances was on London's, I think it was their Daily Telegraph. And she was a cover story before the original book was published. So in 1971, she's a cover story on a major metropolitan newspaper. It's really a fascinating story for all those reasons. So that could be where Brian Talbot first saw her.
It's amazing. And then let's see. Jabba's all excited about kayfabe effect on black lights. Absolutely. All right. Here's where I'm a knucklehead and stuff. So kayfabe, what is, help me on the definition of kayfabe, buddy.
Kayfabe is a wrestling term. So, Ed Piskor, who I do cartoonist kayfabe with, and I are both wrestling fans. Okay. Kayfabe is wrestling language. It comes from Carney speak, basically to stay in character. So if a couple of wrestlers are having a cigarette out back and they see a fan approaching, they say kayfabe, kayfabe, and then they have to act however they're supposed to act to keep that illusion alive. People point out that we kind of do the opposite of kayfabe because we're breaking down comics and their mechanics a little bit. But that's all right. I feel like it's a storytelling term and it's alliterative. So, makes sense with comics.
Jim, next time you're in Chicago and when things get somewhat back to normal, I got to take you to Miller's Pub. And it's a great old Chicago area restaurant. I took a bunch of comic creators there at C2E2. And it was a massive wrestling hangout back, pre-WWE when they had, territories and stuff. And this was the big Chicago territory hangout. Bob Luce Wrestling was the promoter here in Chicago. And it was Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher and, all those Midwest guys and stuff. Moose Cholak and, people, Bobo Brazil. And they all used to go to this place. And seriously, my dad had his restaurant down the street. And it would close at 8 p.m. at night. It was a commuter restaurant. And he'd be at 8 o'clock, he'd go, hey, let's hit Miller's before we go home and see if any wrestlers are there. I'm like, okay, Dad, that sounds great.
That's really awesome. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, man. I mean, again, being older and stuff, I was more old school, But, all right, let's see here. What else have we got? Oh, here we go. John Westhoff. Jim, did you think about selling black lights with the comic? That's hilarious. And what about Wizard Boss?
Some people have suggested selling the black lights, and it's not something I plan to do because it makes packaging a little bit more challenging, which is a big concern with Kickstarter. But I may post some links, if I find some spot online that's easy to get. I'm sure you can get them at Amazon. I actually haven't looked. I have a black light from a long time ago, so I am covered on the black light front. But I think it's probably easier for people to find their own black lights than for me to ship those. I imagine I would get some complaints about the condition that they arrive in. As for wizard bongs, I have a feeling there's probably plenty of wizard bongs already out there. That's probably another thing for people to source on their own.
Absolutely. Hey, man, they just declared it legal in January here in Illinois. And I can tell you, myself and a bunch of other friends were all like, man, we did not think this would happen until we were collecting Social Security. Finally! So, yeah, man, I
well, there'll probably be a surplus of wizard bongs in Illinois soon if they're not already there.
Right by Chicago Comics, there are literally 2 smoke shops in that immediate area and stuff. So very funny and certainly very consistent. And as you point out, the Underground was, such a big supporter of comics. The smoke shop, the head shops were, and Underground Comics. Have you talked to Dennis Kitchen yet?
No, I've been on panels with him in the past, but I haven't talked to him in regards to this project. And, you saying that, like, I've been trying to figure out how to get this project in front of people that are interested in, say, printed matter, and, things
Sure.
like these screen prints. Maybe I should be looking in the smoke shop direction and maybe reconnecting these old head shop bridges.
I talked to him for the first time at the end of 2018. And then I had this weird like medical thing that I'm well past and everything's fine. But man, I had the best conversation with him. And honestly, that whole underground head shop comic thing is absolutely fascinating. They were on the vanguard of creator-owned rights and making sure that after they publish something, after a couple of years, rights would revert back to creators and stuff. No, I'm honestly, he is so cool. Honestly, I'm such a fan of everything he represented in comics, and I think is really one of the good guys out there. So
Kitchen Sink Press, when I first started reading like indie comics, would have been probably right after Tundra folded or combined with Kitchen Sink, and I would order them through the mail. It was before the internet, like 94, 95, and I didn't really have a great comic shop, but I was discovering these black and white comics. And so Kitchen Sink would put out their little mail order catalog, and it's where I got things like From Hell, Xenozoic Tales, became a huge fan of. Black Hole, I believe was first published. The first couple of issues or first issue or two was published through there. And so like these were huge, massive books for me as a reader, like seeing this stuff. And I think of Black Hole, like that stuff to me looks like a blacklight poster. So, I've been on this track for a while, I suppose.
Very cool, man. Let's see here. Gregory Giordano. Hey, Jim, paid for the book plus 3 print level. Very cool. Cartoonist Kayfabe, ringside seats, loves you, man. Very nice. Absolutely.
Thanks,
Kayfabe.
Gregory. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
Cartoonist Kayfabe ringside. Easy for me to say, right? Cartoonist Kayfabe ringside seats is a Facebook group that fans for the show, and they have been making their own stuff, sometimes individually, but also as a group. We recently reviewed one of their publications. It was Wizard, Wizerd. It was a 250-page full-color fanzine. Absolutely spectacular. Interviews with a bunch of cartoonists, lots of comics in it, profiles on people like Diana Schutz. It was just this amazing fanzine. Like I have tons of fanzines. I love those things. And this one was one of the best. And it was all, just this group, a bunch of friends that got together that love comics. So very exciting for me to see.
That's excellent, man. Hey, and I think I'm getting some kayfabe people in the chat for the first time. I hope you people will hang out and subscribe and like the video and share it. And honestly, like I said, I'm a longtime fan of Jim's and Ed's, and have been meaning to have them both back, as I was telling Jim off the air and stuff. So this was a great reason to get him on. And again, what you guys do with the podcast is great. Now, when you do a shoot, I'm assuming that's another wrestling term. So yeah. So is that just a deep dive interview? How would you describe those episodes?
Yeah, and some are much more like a shoot interview. As you say, it goes back to the wrestling term, which would be like a wrestler breaking kayfabe and just talking very candidly about their career, their matches and relationships and things behind the scenes. So that's where we get the name from. Keeping in the kayfabe lexicon. Some of them are very deep dives. Depending on the artist. I think sometimes it's a little bit more about whatever their new project is that they're pushing. But we've had the great fortune of talking to a lot of cartoonists on a deep level. Steve Bissette came on and talked to us for 4 hours. So
that's great.
These guys have such a rich history. We talked to him and Rick Veitch and Tim Truman, and it's like these are guys that go back to, I believe Rick Veitch was talking about the very earliest days of the direct market. I think Mike Friedrich from Star Reach had come to the Kubert School and was basically describing the direct market before it actually existed. As like, wow, this thing is coming and this is probably what it'll look like. And of course that sets up creator rights. So you talk to these guys and it's like, they've been through the entire history of the direct market, including stints at like a DC or a Marvel or both. They were both there at Image early on. They were self-publishing in the 90s. So it's a really valuable thing to be able to talk to these guys. And we recognize that, in some cases they're heroes that we looked up to when we were kids as readers, but also just their knowledge is, it's real history. Like they were there.
But you see, that's what makes you guys smart creators of today. Where the influences come from. You go to the source and find out exactly how they did it. I'm doing it as a fan and everything. And I really again, appreciate what you guys are doing because you have that artist knowledge to really, I think, go in different directions. And that's why it's like, this is great. We need more smart comic book podcast conversation. I certainly consider you guys in that mix. And, I hope to achieve some level of that just being a fan. But I mean, really, I love what you guys are doing. And again, every time you and I talk, whether it's at a con or when we've done the podcast and stuff, it's always a great conversation. So
I agree. It's part of what prompted Ed and I to start doing it is because that's what we would do at these shows. You go and you get to talk to a bunch of smart comics people, and it's like, man, we should be recording this stuff because I love comics. I love cartoonists, and it's you get to hear the whole history whenever you get to sit down and have dinner with one of these guys or corner them after hours. So it's nice to be able to share some of that.
Agreed. Kyle Fegley's joining us, great CBR reporter, and of course, now doing some wonderful writing himself. Curious, with all the throwback style comics printing you've done, is there any print format that has just proven impossible to do in the 21st century? Good question.
Maybe a mimeograph. I don't know. I haven't run into anything yet. I'm not trying to be obscure in what I print. It surprises me that people haven't done the blacklight printing already because one, there was a lot of blacklight printing. Whenever I had the idea, I started just looking around, which is what I do with a lot of this stuff is I have an idea for a comic and then I want to see it. I want to read it. And if I can't find it, then it's like, all right, maybe I'll try to make one. And it surprises me that the blacklight comic hadn't been done already. I mentioned there are some technical challenges. If you look at a lot of Kickstarters, they'll do things like variant covers on maybe a small print run. I can't do that. I can't print on demand this fluorescent.
Okay.
There are some technical things, like Kickstarter, usually there's a digital component, a digital edition, and you can't really do the fluorescent digitally. So that's been a challenge. I wasn't going to have a digital component, but I realized you have to, if you're doing a comics project, you almost have to have some kind of a PDF version. And so I've been putting that together this week. And, I do have that component and, it's kind of the entry level and then you get it with each subsequent reward. It's been so much fun putting it together because I couldn't figure out exactly what I was going to do. And I've ended up making 3 of them. And this is my shortcomings as a Kickstarter. Those should have been stretch goals. But instead, I'm just like, well, if you signed up for one, you're actually going to get all 3. And I'm making a black and white edition, which is fun for me because I love black and white comics. I'm making what I call a neon edition, which are these like blown out monitor kind of super bright saturated colors that you couldn't really print. And then I'm doing a retro one. So it kind of looks like it's of the 70s. And putting those together has been so much fun. But it's something I didn't exactly have mapped out, and really have only got onto this week whenever I was trying to solve the problem of what's a good digital version for this.
Well, I loved your pages in Aphrodisiac that really looked like old throwback, kind of Bandai kind of pages.
Yes.
If I'm saying it correctly.
Yeah. That's how I say it.
All right, good deal. Well, honestly, again, man, I feel like, a knucklehead that watches like ER and is talking to an actual doctor. It's like, right? Am I right? I saw it on TV.
Yeah, we do that. We do that on Cartoonist Kayfabe. But the thing I'm guilty of is like you read everybody's name. And when you try to pronounce these names, you find out just how much you've been reading and not actually hearing those names. But,
speaking of Bandai, I think of Dean Haspiel. And he's
Dino.
Here. There you go. I agree, Dean. Jim is one of my favorite modern cartoonists as well, and a heck of a guy. Couldn't say it better than that. And Chaos and Comics, nice point. And again, this goes back to, he says, if you've only watched one of our Howard Chaykin interviews, either mine or what you guys did, you need to watch the others. Completely agree. This is why I welcome shows. I mean, I'm celebrating my 15th year, Jim, doing the podcast. How many years have you guys? How many years have you been podcasting? And then also Kayfabe.
Kayfabe, we started in October 2018, so about a year and a half.
Okay, but before that, you were doing your other podcast.
Yeah, I did a podcast, and I don't remember the years, but probably like 2012, around there, for a couple of years, called "Tell Me Something I Don't Know." I did with Jason Lex, and then with Jason Lex and Ed Piskor, so about 3 years worth with that show.
That's excellent, man, and that's my point. It's like different points of view, have different conversations. So it's great. Here's another great guy, Fabio Moon.
Oh,
hey,
wow.
Fabio, how you doing, man?
Yeah, man.
Oh, that's great. Oh, man. That'd be great. The way that you guys are going, you'll soon be interviewing Bill Watterson. I certainly hope so for your guys' sake. That would be amazing.
Hey, Fabio, man, from your mouth to God's ear, my friend, I would love to interview Bill Watterson. That's one of the fun things with Cartoonist Kayfabe is we get in these different things that we'll be reading or covering for a week or a couple of weeks. And with Bill Watterson, we did an interview. We covered an interview. We covered the Comics Journal interview where we read that interview and then we kind of go through and pull out some points that of interest. And then we went through and read some of his work. And it was like the best 2 weeks of my life going back through Calvin and Hobbes. I was telling everybody, this is what we should be doing for mental health, is like read Calvin and Hobbes before bed every night. It was really, I could feel a difference just from going through that work. So he's definitely a guy. I mean, that's a dream interview probably for anybody that's even a little bit of a comics fan. That works special.
The J.D. Salinger, I think, of comic books or comic strips, I suppose. No, I agree. And by the way, Gabriel, got to get you and Fabio on. It would be great. I'm sure that Jim and Ed feel the same. If you haven't already had the brothers on, I don't know if you have had the brothers.
We haven't, but we did have Gerard Way on.
I saw
collaborators. So, man, there's just not enough time, John. my list of cartoonists that I'm fans of and books I'm fans of, man, it doesn't get shorter. You would think, you do half a dozen shows a week, the list just grows. It doesn't go the other way for some reason.
I hear you, man. I finally, I've seen the brothers at shows for years and finally got a chance. It was weird. I did an interview with them 5 or 6 years ago. And at Rose City last year, I did see them. And they're like, hey, have we done your show? I'm like, yeah, actually, it's been a long time, but you did. And I said, God, please come back, man. It was so sweet of them. And I was talking to, as we mentioned, Diana Schutz, who I love. She's great. Man, she was one of my first, within my first year conversations. And again, just one of those people that really has been around for such a long time and has so much knowledge. And I every time I talk to her, I'm so pleased. She's terrific. So
I've never met her in person. I've read about her and I've read interviews with her. I'm familiar with her history, and it is quite a history. So hopefully at some point our paths will cross.
How often do you do shows, man? Because I'll tell you, since the pandemic, partially to get more video savvy, I've really been tripling my output, and everybody's saying, hey, yeah, I'm available right now. And I do think beyond the fact that it is such a weird time, I'll be honest, I think having these conversations has been a great distraction for people. And I know people have already emailed me and messaged me and said that they feel that way. So yeah, I don't know if your output has increased because also you're making the donuts. I'm talking about making the donuts with everybody. So
yeah, I don't know that it's increased, but we get that same feedback from people. And I'm listening and watching things and kind of loving it. And it is strange times. You want to sort of make omelets out of these broken eggs as much as possible. Not sure that's quite the right phrase, but we're trying to do the best we can with this. And we've definitely, it seems like from an audience standpoint, we've seen growth there. So I think people are interested in, I don't know if they have more time or if they're working from home and like to have a voice, in the background with them, but it all adds up to what seems like as positive as you can make this experience. In terms of the interviews and the number of shows, it's like I was saying, there's no shortage of material or people to talk to. It's really a matter of just trying to balance it between like making Cartoonist Kayfabe and making the comics, as you said. And so we recorded about the same schedule as we did before. We basically dedicate 1 day a week to recording, and we'll record anywhere from 4 to 8 shows, depending on what we have in store. And then we go off and we kind of prep those for release and then prep for the next week, depending on what, who's coming on or what we're planning to review or read.
Okay, I'm doing a mix of live with chat and then also some pre-recorded as well. Oh, this is great. I just started reposting on Twitch and someone's like, hey, it says only one person is watching. This can't be true. Don't worry, Honest Thief. Actually, we're doing fine with our numbers right now. And, I've like I said, I'm using StreamYard. StreamYard lets me simulcast at 5 different places at once. So I'm on YouTube right now. I'm on Facebook. Through Twitter, I'm on Periscope. And now Twitch as well. So don't worry, Honest Thief, you're not alone. And that is the place that's the smallest yard space that I have right now, where I'm still kind of growing the crops and just planting the seeds. So, but don't worry, you are among many. And also, here's a nice little compliment from Eli. Cartoonist Kayfabe has for sure changed the direction of my comics life. Thank you. So very cool from Eli. That's
Eli.
great.
Eli is the guy behind that Wizard fanzine that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
I think
Nice
he's the one
going,
who
Eli.
organized it. I think he's sort of the editor in chief there, the Gareb Seamus, if you will, of the Wizard fanzine.
That's almost an insult, Eli, but we know that as a compliment. It's all right. At least that's been my experience with Gareb. I'm not, whatever to Gareb. God bless him.
He's probably one of the people that people write in of who we should talk to, and Gareb may be the most requested guest.
Oh, Jim, I'll tell you, I talked to him. I forget the year, but essentially it was when the magazine was still hanging on, and they had an online presence. But I really felt like George Stephanopoulos trying to get a straight answer out of a politician, because I'm like, how are you competing with this now 24/7 comic news cycle with a monthly publication? He said, well, we just have to come out with compelling content. And I'm like, so what does that mean? Just compelling. And he just kept saying it over and over again. It's in my feed, everybody, if you want to check it out. And I would think that Jim and Ed are probably a little smarter than I am in terms of being able to get an interesting answer out of Gareb. And, with those ace cons and stuff, he's certainly still part of the mix in his way.
Interesting character for sure.
There you go. A very diplomatic answer. I like it. Mike Oming is here. Hey, Jim Rugg. Kayfabe is my favorite YouTube channel. That's very sweet. Absolutely, Mike. I agree with you, man. Good
Thank
stuff.
you, Mike. Yeah, that's great to hear. Mike was one of the first guys to jump on my Kickstarter, which was awesome. Whenever I was like really starting out, the first couple of years that I was making little mini comics, I would see Mike because I think he's in New Jersey or somewhere and I'm in Pittsburgh, but I would see him at the Pittsburgh con and he was always a great guy there. Whenever my comics were really not worthy of anybody's time, he was always very supportive then too. So very cool.
That's awesome. Now, one of my favorite of your mini comics, of course, is Rambo 3.5, a fine unauthorized story. What did you think of Last Blood?
Oh man, I feel like I'm going to be outed here, John. I have not seen Last Blood. I heard mixed reviews on it, and I just didn't make it out to the theater to see it, and haven't tracked it down yet.
It's on Amazon Prime, Jim, and I haven't watched it yet either. So I'm relieved to hear that. And with me, it was really juggling a few freelance jobs and stuff. Sometimes really great stuff that everyone's like, oh, you got to see it, you got to see it. It's like, yeah, I still haven't seen it yet. Sorry, I've just been too busy.
It feels like we live in a very asynchronous time now, where there's no sense of like this thing drops on this day and then everybody that's the day they line up for it. It just doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like everything's available now all the time, and so like we're all dipping in and out of things at different paces. I don't know, man. It's part of the adjustment. It's part of you streaming this to five outlets at once. It's like it's just a lot of I don't know. It's a different world than even 10 years ago in those terms.
God, yes, absolutely. So you mentioned that Ryan Brown was kind of your Kickstarter guru and stuff. Did you have a podcast or YouTube guru that you leaned on?
Not really. I got into podcasting because as an artist, I was at home alone, and I would just listen to stuff. And I quit my day job in 2007, and my wife would be away at work, and it was like I was the last human being on earth sitting here. And so it was a big adjustment, and I would just look for things to listen to. At first, it was like NPR's feed, and that was right around when podcasts really started to happen. I was listening to Mark Maron in the first episode, and Adam Carolla and all these like long running podcasts, because I would hear them like transition from whatever radio streaming thing they were doing to their podcast. And I did that for years. And that's what led me to want a podcast, is just like, again, whenever I see something and I'm interested in it, I want to make it, like I want to see like, how's it made? I'll try to make one. And I just randomly, that's the interesting thing now. We live in a time where whatever you're trying to make, you can find tutorials, you can find videos and web pages that are often written by like 14-year-olds that are better writers than I am. It's remarkable, but that I just kind of taught myself and would ask people, that I would cross paths with, how they do it. And, as especially podcasting, it's relatively low tech and low barrier to entry, not unlike comics. And, you make some mistakes along the way and maybe you sound a little bit rough, but that's a nice thing with YouTube. It's almost that aesthetic, that homemade amateur aesthetic in a way is like, it's fine. Like that's kind of the video format at this point.
Agreed. And, it's funny. One of my YouTube buddies, Rob Burnett, has kind of been railing on Quibi and the 10-minute, increment video that they're proposing with this. And I feel the same way that Rob does in terms of, hey, congratulations and welcome to 2009. Because they really think they've done something incredibly innovative, and they put $1 billion in it, $1 billion. And it's like, folks, the video platform has evolved since 9-minute increments. My buddy Julianne Emery, who is on the current season of Bosch on Amazon Prime, great actress, she was making her own TV show called Then We Get Help. And it was a group therapy show that she shot in her apartment with her iPhones. This is even before iPad technology, and literally would have these great sit downs with TV executives. How'd you shoot this? With my phones. Where? In my apartment. Well, how'd you put it together? I bought video software and I learned how to edit. And it's like, well, that's amazing. And it's like, okay, I guess. I mean, it's like you make your own platform, and Dana Gould is a big proponent of that as well. If you're not getting the gigs you want, make your own showcase, do your own thing. And that was what happened with me with radio, and that's why I turned to podcasting in 2005. Dean Haspiel has a review of Last Blood real fast, and then I do. Last Blood is awful, and now that you know that, you can enjoy it as a B- Grindhouse movie. That's good to know, Dean, because I probably would still watch it. What do you think, Jim?
I was never expecting it to be more than a Grindhouse movie, so yeah. I might love it. It might be exactly what I was hoping for.
But what do you think? What do you think of, like I said, I mean, in terms of, John,
it's not different than my background. The way I start making comics is making mini comics.
Right.
I went to, I just fell out of interest with Marvel Comics, probably whenever Image started. I saw all my favorite artists say, hey, make your own characters, own your own characters. So I followed them to Image. That was cool for a year or so. And, those aren't the best comics. I got bored with those. And I found alternative comics. And then the industry collapses in the 90s and I start making stuff in 2000s. And I go to SPX. And it's this wonderful world of mini comics. Probably met Dean Haspiel there. And I came home with a box of these mini comics that had silkscreen covers and were all different sizes. And they were just super inventive, but none of them were offset printed or required anything that I didn't have access to. Get a long arm stapler and a guillotine paper cutter and you're in business. And so it was so empowering. And I see the same stuff now with YouTube or with a podcast where you shoot it on your phone. Ed and I shoot a lot of videos on our phones. So in a lot of ways, it's very similar to what I saw with making my own comics. I see it with all this media now. It's remarkable. It's almost like whatever idea you have, it's never been more doable than it is now. When I was a kid, it was inconceivable that you would be making a video that, potentially millions of people could watch. How on earth, that was literally impossible when I was a kid, short of a Hollywood model or possibly an indie filmmaking model. And now it's you do any of this stuff.
Now, another great short form show was The Guild. Jim, I had forgotten that you drew the Guild comic. That's awesome.
I did. Yeah, that was a really good experience. It was with Dark Horse, and it was around the time of Aphrodisiac, and it was shortly after the 2008 economic collapse, which was hard on me. I lost a couple of big jobs and, had quit my job shortly before that. So it was a scary time, and I was thinking about leaving comics, and that was one of the jobs that, sort of arrived at the right place for me to really help out. But Felicia Day, the writer, that was her first comic book. That was her first comic book. The Plain Janes with Cecil Castellucci, that was her first comic book. And One Model Nation with Courtney Taylor, that was his first comic book. So I had these three writers who, great storytellers, lots of experience as storytellers, all smart, all with a good idea, but their first time making comics. And it just kind of lined up that way. Fortunately, we had good editors involved with each of the projects, and I think they, deserve a lot of the credit for shaping that stuff. But it was still an interesting experience to work with these people who, great storytellers, but learning the comics part. And fortunately, they were all very generous with me and deferred to if there's a better way to change this sequence or these panels, they left that open to me. But it was interesting to see writers coming to comics and seeing kind of the similar things that they would do. The panel, having too much action in a panel, comics are naturally, they have this decompression tendency, and you've kind of got to figure out tools to overcome that. But sure. All these writers, I would get maybe 3 moments happening in a panel, and it's it just doesn't work that way. It's a snapshot of time, it's almost like a pause button. So you can't have action, reaction. Be very common in film, but it can't happen in one panel usually. So that was interesting experience. But Felicia was great. I really enjoyed that series.
Okay, so I want to know a couple of the editors. So who was your guild editor at Dark Horse?
Scott Ali.
Oh, sure.
Longtime Hellboy editor.
Absolutely. Scott always has a great eye for interesting people. And also Plain Jane's, am I right? Shelley Bond?
Shelley Bond, who I still am in touch with. Another person I talked to leading up to this Kickstarter. She's great. Like, that's another person I would love to sit down and talk to, just to hear her history, because, like, you know, you mentioned Diana Schutz being there forever. Shelley Bond started at Comico. So, you know, like, she has Comico and then Vertigo, you know, through the 90s. She's at DC through the 90s and 2000s. And to me, the 90s are a fascinating time for comics. So
totally agree.
Yeah, well, she's also, one of my favorites.
I was going to say, I'm surprised because she said she had spoken to you recently. I assumed it was for the podcast because, and it's ironic because a couple Fridays ago I had her on talking about her new project, and right now I'm blanking on
Insider Art.
Inside Art, absolutely, yeah, man. And in fact, she'll come back in June with one of the other big creators involved with that, and I'm looking forward to having another conversation. No, Shelley's fantastic, and I always say we're like symbiotic, like brother sister, in terms of, oh, if we went to the same college, you know, we both worked at the college radio station and, you know, really thought our careers were going to go in a certain direction. They went into different directions. We don't regret it, but it's been an interesting time post college. And yeah, man, and Philip is a cool guy as well, her husband. No, I'm a huge Shelley fan. She's fantastic, and she'd be perfect for you guys. So,
she's had a major impact with me. You know, I mean, Plain Jane's was the first time I worked with an editor or worked with like Marvel DC, and I worked very closely with her because the book we did was the last book added to a line they were launching in the first book they released.
Yeah, it was the Minx line, right?
Yeah, the young adult line. And I think so much of her for lots of different reasons. One, personal experience was really positive, and I feel like I learned a lot. But I also think she's very innovative in what she thinks of. You know, that Minx line, that young adult line, if you look at comics landscape now, wow, that's a gigantic piece of comics. But it was the very beginning of it. And, you know, there just wasn't, I don't know that they had sales channels to reach that audience at the time and stuff, but she was still there. Like, she still realized, like, this is coming. This is something to do. And we were probably just a little ahead of the curve at the time.
Just like Zuda was with digital comics and stuff, you know? I mean, and again, coming out of that Vertigo office, I have such respect for all those Vertigo editors, because as they now say, you look for the tastemakers, and they're the trendsetters and stuff. And I say that truly, Shelley and Will Dennis and and I always blank after those two, but so many other great editors that came out of Vertigo. Of course, Axel Alonso,
right?
Back in the day, Karen herself, Karen Berger. But everybody,
yeah, that's a huge name. Karen, you know, Karen's influence is another one, and we talked to Steve Bissett a lot about her when we interviewed him. You know, I just want records of these people's experiences, because they were there. Like, they shaped where comics are today in a very meaningful, deliberate, hands-on way.
Jim, I'm with you. And then again, this is why I love your show, what you guys do, because that is my edict as well, in terms of, let's get it from the source. There are too many, frankly, and you can hear the irritation in my voice, there are too many podcasters out there who think they know the story and are happy to tell you their version of the story.
Sure.
But the reality is very different. And it's like, hey, pull the thumb out of your ass, dial your phone, or I guess, you know, dials are showing my age. But yeah, call the person or email the person, get them on the record. They were there. They can give you the straight shit. I love, and in fact, another thing I love what you guys are doing with Kayfabe is the idea that you're taking those great old Comics Journal interviews or Wizard issues or whatever, and really kind of looking back and analyzing that stuff, because that was what my intent was with Word Balloon, is do an audio version of that and capture not only creators of the moment, but also going back and talking to, you know, people from, you know, 10 or 12 years ago or 20 years ago, and say, what were you thinking when you did this? All right, and also 10 or 20 years later, what do you think of it now, looking back? What is your perspective on this?
It is cool. It's interesting to think of how fan culture has evolved to this point, because I love those old fanzines too. And comics now are accepted in a lot of colleges and schools where they weren't for, you know, the first 50 years of their history. And so it was fans that kept that together forever.
Agreed. I don't, and you know, sometimes I pop up a comment. I don't mean to interrupt you, Jim. I hope I didn't do that by throwing up Dean's comment here, but yeah, and he's right about that. Minx was ahead of its time. Zuda was picking up what Activate was laying down. Yeah, man, and I was talking to Dean and a lot of the Activate creators back then. So I'm absolutely with you, man. It's true. It's a very interesting time. So now back to Octobriana and everything and what you're doing with this project. Talk about this now. Again, I mentioned it earlier that along with the book itself, that you are doing, blacklight posters as well, and also calling back a few of your old books as well in some of the higher tiers of when people contribute and everything.
Yeah, in some cases, I think there's a real natural fit there. I've had people mention, having strong female characters, so I am pairing the Street Angel hardcover, as one of the options. It's set in the 70s, so there's also an aphrodisiac tier. If you like that kind of retro art, here's a couple of books, Aphrodisiac and Octobriana, 1976. You mentioned the blacklight posters, and I think Jabba had brought those up in the beginning. I love screen printing. Sometimes I do it myself. Sometimes somebody else does it and I just design the print. And so I've done several of those over the years. And I'm reprinting one of the first ones that just really sold out quickly. The one I had done with Telegraph in 2014. That's Dragon Killer. That's kind of the thing that really got the ball rolling on this project. So we're reprinting that one. We have an Aphrodisiac blacklight print, which I had set up years ago, but never printed because it is kind of a commitment and it's, I just never got around to it. So now is the perfect opportunity for that. And it's a great print of like Vietnam, 20,000 BC. And there's like a T-Rex chasing him through the woods. Kind of perfect for this. And then the third one is Octobriana. It's a tie-in. It's one of the images you showed earlier, John, in front of the Coca-Cola. Something about Coca-Cola is tied to all of this underground stuff. There was Pravda, Guy Pilart's other one of his graphic novels. The edition I have, the opening end pages have the main character with the Coca-Cola in her hand. So one of the pieces of Octobriana, if you read the original book, is that she loves Coca-Cola. So that's where you see that background. And recently we looked at Spain Rodriguez's Trash Man, and there's like one color panel, I think, in like the original newspaper. And it's with the Coca-Cola logo behind him. So I don't know what that connection is, but it definitely exists. And, just personally, I like the history of like sign painting. And I always think of like all the sign painters that like Coca-Cola would employ. And it would be their job to travel around with a trunk full of paint and to paint a big mural on the side of these places that sold Coca-Cola. And if you ever get into like sign painting history, those guys talk about having skill set, like be able to paint a beautiful woman in that, that was, you were the next level of sign painter then if you had that skill. So it's almost like cartoonists in the past that would have needed, a couple of textures to be able to do like mud and leather and, hair and a few of these things. I always think of the EC guys that had like about 4 textures you needed, and you could kind of describe a lot of surfaces with that. But it's just the craft, I love looking into it. And with that, the Coke thing, I don't know, it's almost ubiquitous back through all of this pop culture, both mainstream and underground stuff. It's kind of weird.
Well, yeah. And I mean, the way that Coke was able to globally impact the world, especially during World War II, and literally to keep the servicemen comfortable. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And of course, carving out a nice little business niche for them in every country they would invade, but literally setting up these Coca-Cola bottlers globally. And one of my favorite stories about that, especially being a boxing guy, that Max Schmeling, the former heavyweight champion who famously fought Joe Louis in the 30s, and that was a very big pre-World War II Nazism versus, the American way. Not that Schmeling was a Nazi, but obviously Hitler kind of glommed onto him and kind of made him part of the propaganda. And how after the war, Max Schmeling had retired and became a very key executive with Coca-Cola in Germany and really one of the top men there and a very wealthy man. And
I did not know that.
And Ty Cobb, of course, had his association with Coca-Cola and stuff. So, yeah.
Wonder how Coke feels about that now.
Yeah, no shit. Absolutely. And honestly, there's another documentary for people to check out, The Cola Wars, and not only Coke, but Pepsi. And even, and I'm going to forget what it was called, Moxie. Moxie was an early Coke and Pepsi competitor of the late 1800s into the early 20th century. And it's fascinating hearing their cultural impact on the world. So very, very cool stuff and everything. And I know Pepsi if I didn't already say it just now, Joan Crawford was a big, the actress was a big Pepsi executive and stuff. So again, it's as I hope I didn't insult you when I called you the Quentin Tarantino of comics, because I think that puts you in a box. And again, what you do with your stuff exceeds, but you have these pop culture touchstones like Octobriana that you discover, these obscure little moments and stuff, but that actually have an interesting little underground reverberation and stuff. And you pick up on that and spin them into your own projects.
I'm a big fan of advertising, and comparing me to Tarantino, that's never going to be an insult to me, by the way. But I do love advertising for a lot of reasons. I think it's interesting storytelling in that it's such a condensed, like if you think of, I rail against decompressed storytelling sometimes. Advertising is kind of the opposite. It's like mainlining storytelling. It's so condensed. So I'm a fan of advertising and the history of that. Growing up in Pittsburgh, Andy Warhol is a seminal figure here. And that's a guy who played with advertising in every way imaginable, both subverting it, exploiting it, and really looking at it from a different angle. So, yeah, man, I think that's where a lot of those sources come from for me, is just it's sort of where I grew up. It comes very naturally looking at some of the big influential people that were around this area as I grew up.
That's cool. Jabba has a good comment. I wonder if it was like Marlboro and Levi's being more valuable than currency in the Soviet Union. Yeah, I think it was, man. I really do, Jabba. That's the thing. They represented freedom, and I think, again, kind of a real counterculture move compared to what was going on in the Soviet dictums and everything. So your revolutionaries and stuff. I don't know how much they would wear their jeans in public, or God, if I'm sure they got busted hard if they were caught with Coca-Cola and stuff.
There was a show I was watching on Amazon Prime. I think it's called Comrade Detective, and it kind of it kind of lampoons all of what we're talking about. But denim, illegal jeans are part of the big storyline that they're trying to find this smuggler person.
Now all right. Now forgive me, it's blocking us, but I want to read what Gregory wrote here. Coca-Cola has a place in samizdat and agitprop material in Eastern Bloc in Russia. It was a symbol of Western U.S. decadence and was both wanted to drink but also used to symbolize pushback against the Soviet rule. Read Coca-Cola Socialism, Americanization of Yugoslav Culture in the 60s by Radina Vucetic. Lots of good info. I appreciate that, Gregory.
Always that's really great. And John, I want to pull up one piece that he mentioned there was samizdat. So that's a Russian word. I believe it's Russian, and it means publish it yourself. And so it refers to these illegal pamphlets and magazines that people would produce because, all the copy machines, all the printing presses, those are all state owned. Everything that would have been printed has to go through the state. And so if you were producing anything outside of that approval, even if it was harmless, it would still be illegal. And so, of course, people did this anyway. And that was samizdat. So I've compared those in the past to zines, but that illegal component makes them a little bit different than zines, much more of a risky endeavor to produce, in those conditions than a zine is. When I think of a zine, it's just something you're photocopying here. There's not a lot of risk depending on the content. But, in Russia, it would have been, or in the Soviet Union, that would have been illegal no matter what the content.
Interesting. And you're right, a big deal. Now, you say you have Amazon Prime. Did you see, because I'm always up for a cool documentary, and magazines of the Mad Men era really fascinate me. And there was a wonderful documentary about Playboy's original art director. And I'm blanking on what it was called and the gentleman's name, frankly. And also, just like when you get excited about Pittsburgh history, that's how I am with Chicago history. And certainly the history of Playboy has a huge chapter in Chicago. That's where the magazine was born. And being such an advertising mecca as Chicago was, Hefner leaned on a lot of the great admin and stuff to kind of make his magazine. But it's really, really interesting. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it.
I haven't seen it. The other piece of Playboy is the cartooning history and Hefner's connection to that and all the cartoonists that have come through Playboy and been connected to it. So, Yeah, that sounds interesting, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. And, Patty Farmer, before Hefner died, Patty Farmer was in the midst of a multi-volume look at the history of Playboy. And her last volume that she released was called Playboy Laughs. And it was half about the comedy clubs that Playboy had over, all over the country, but also the cartoonists that worked for Playboy. And she had great stories that she had collected about, again, a lot of these EC guys like Kurtzman and Will Elder and people like that. I always tell Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda when they were doing Harley Quinn, and really became the groundbreaking thing that Harley became, and then really, I think their version more than any inspired what has been done with Harley in recent history and stuff. I'm like, you guys are doing Little Annie Fanny with Harley Quinn as opposed to, and they're like, shh, don't tell anybody. I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like, no, that's great, because it really was, Little Annie Fanny essentially was the grandmother of Harley Quinn, I think, in a lot of ways. I don't know if you've made that comparison or saw that linkage like I did.
Yeah, it's not a connection I would have made. And I'm working on gathering materials to do an episode that Little Annie Fanny will be part of. Not just her, but several of these types of characters. So I don't know. Stay tuned. At some point, hopefully. My list of potential videos is very, very long. So I'm probably working on many more than I will actually make. Eli
Schwab has come up with the name. That's Art Paul. That's the Playboy art director that the documentary is about. And it's amazing, and really covers his post Playboy career as well. Really unbelievable stuff. And yeah, I recommend to anyone that is, fascinated by that kind of art direction and magazine production of that classic era, and then beyond, what he did with his own stuff, and then bringing so many great real artists, painters to Playboy, not just the cartoonists, but really some, amazing painters that would do work in, of all things, Playboy. And that's why it's so funny that Playboy, I only read it for the articles. It's like, yeah, guess what? In between the nudie pictures, there was an incredible literate magazine that had some incredible art in it. And I'm not embarrassed when I go and pick up my retro Playboys and stuff at yard sales or at flea markets and stuff. I hope those things come back. So, yeah, The Art of Playboy is the documentary. That's the name of it. Thank you, Eli. Absolutely. And it is on Amazon Prime right now, so I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Unbelievable stuff. So yeah, man. I mean, so Kayfabe, you've done almost 400 episodes and everything, which is great. And as you say, so you do several at a time, and then you kind of go back and edit. Do you ever do episodes where you do live chats and stuff, and ever stream live?
We have, yeah. Sometimes we stream. We do like a weekly show where we just catch up, talk about what we've been doing, what we've been watching or reading, or whatever interest thing is going on. And sometimes we do those live. We also do mailbag episodes, and sometimes we do those live. It really just depends on schedule and kind of what's going on, because we are kind of moving around, and we lately have been building our recording around the guests. And so that sometimes means recording at weird times, or, various obstacles arise. But we do some live episodes.
I understand. By the way, you did a great job with Mark Miller. I loved that interview. I thought that was fantastic. And,
he was really fun, but almost everyone has been, and we've been very fortunate. Some of the people, we've gotten to talk to both big kind of very successful commercially people like Mark Miller, but we've also gotten to talk to people like Brendan McCarthy, who's a real art hero of mine, and it always surprises me, like, where these people, how they perceive themselves, because in my mind, it's like Brendan McCarthy, visual genius, so far ahead of his time. And whenever we talk to him, it felt like he hasn't had that chance to really tell his story. We had Tim Vigil was one of our first interviews we ever did. And Vigil was important to me coming up. He was one of the first guys I found that was really like, wow, I can't show my parents. I can't let my parents see that I have his comics, but also this incredible level of craft. And it was just like comics I'd never seen before. It expanded sort of the landscape of what I thought comics could be. And I just thought it was some indie guy that I liked. And as I've gotten older and talked to other cartoonists, everybody has that experience of finding Tim Vigil's art. And so, that was one of the first real shoot-like interviews we did, where we sat down with him in a hotel. Weren't sure what to get, we were going to get, because if you've talked to him at shows, he's often pretty quiet. He's not very conversational in conventions, at least whenever I've approached him in the past. But whenever we sat down to talk, he just opened up. And I think it's another one of those examples where, like, maybe he hasn't had a chance to tell his story. And so the chance to really talk about what he's done and where he comes from appealed to him. Maybe it was right time, right place, but I loved it. It was one of those exciting moments for me where it was like, oh yeah, we need to do this with everybody that we can, just to get record of these guys that, again, I may take them for granted because in my mind, it's like, this guy's he's a superhero of cartooning, but maybe that's my bias, and you talk to them and realize like, they don't necessarily feel that way. And so it's great to like, let them know I'm not the only one that feels this, like everybody my age seems to have found Tim Vigil's work and it left a mark. So, what more can you ask for as an artist? And I want these guys to know it.
I completely understand. And in a similar way, I always felt of the Bronze Age DC writers, Marty Pasco never really got much due. And yeah, and he passed away just a couple weeks ago. And he and I were friends. In fact, he might have been at one of those Cincy shows that you and I were at together. And it was great because I told Tony Moore, I'm like, you got to get Marty out there. He's got incredible stories. And really, over the course of about 12 years, as far as our podcasting goes, I mean, starting in 06, and the last time he was on was probably 2017 or 2018, I really let him tell his story, his point of view of the Bronze Age. He was there, he was the first of his generation of fanboys to write the monthly Superman. So that was a big deal. But, Carrie Bates, Elliot Maggin, I'm trying to think of the other big DC names, certainly Paul Levitz and stuff, Len Wein, they get the gravy and stuff. And no one ever really talked about Marty. And I'm like, Marty really made some interesting contributions. And so it was great. And I really, because of my connections with conventions, got him at a few shows. And a lot of creators went up to him and told him, especially at Tony's show, how much, he meant to them. And I know it meant a lot to him and stuff. So I'm glad that I was able to facilitate that connection for him.
It's a great thing. And I tell people that all the time, reach out to these artists that mean something to you. Let them know. It's, again, you can take it for granted that I have this guy up here. So, he doesn't need to hear from me, but you don't know that that's how they think of themselves. And it never hurts to reach out and let them know that, their work touched your life somehow.
Agreed, man. Here, Alan Chaba here. That's right. Cartoonist Kayfabe wrote that Tim loves Janet Jackson. That's fantastic.
That's the big takeaway, I think, from that interview. We can all agree.
Outstanding, man. So, Jim, do you have time? What are you reading right now? I mean, do you have time to read? I mean, again, I'm throwing myself into this to entertain myself, and I find it hard to. I'm reading a lot of cool stuff, but I find it hard to watch anything new because I am so busy editing and doing a bunch of recording and stuff like that. And I'm enjoying it. So I don't feel bad that I'm missing that stuff. But so many people are, kind of nesting and catching up with movies and new TV shows. I don't know if you're doing any of that.
I've been working a lot. And sometimes I think part of it is to avoid sort of what's going on outside. So I haven't been watching or reading too much stuff. One thing I've been looking at in the evenings is the USS Stevens, the Sam Glanzman collection of his naval stories that ran mostly through DC War Comics in the 70s, but they were in Dell Comics and there were some in Marvel's Savage Tales, I think. Dover did a really great collection of them. And I'm blanking now on the editor and I feel really bad because he actually gave me this book and it's a beautiful book. But when we talked to Tim Truman, he had mentioned Sam Glanzman. So, kind of made me go back and pull the book off the shelf. And they're remarkable. That's another one I'd like to do a video on at some point. Almost everything I end up reading is fodder for a video. But there are all these war stories. They're mostly 4-page stories, which I love short stories, especially if I'm going to read a couple at night. It's a great fit.
Sure.
And they're autobiographical, but they're not autobiographical from a first-person narrator. There's a lot of ancillary materials in the book that kind of talk about how these stories were created. Sam was in the war, was in the Pacific Theater. So he says about 90% of the stories are based on his firsthand experience, things he witnessed. So, it's not autobiographical like navel gazing, like we think of a lot of today's contemporary autobiography or memoirs, but it's autobiographical in the sense of it's this guy's perspective that was there. This is what happens on a ship. This is something that he saw. And over the course of, there must be 80 stories or something, you get a really rich sense of that experience on the ship. They're remarkable comics, really exceptional comics, I think. And I never hear them mentioned, especially in terms of autobiography or something. So that's been a fun book lately that I've spent some time with.
Well, and also Ernie Pyle, the great Stars and Stripes journalist who was able to tell the soldier's story. Glanzman was able to do it with naval stories. I agree with you, and I think it has only been in the last 20 years or so. And you really have to your radar has to be up to get the right people. And again, I'm his name, the editor's name is escaping me as well, but I know he was a massive proponent of like, hey, you got to pay attention to Sam's contribution to comics. I mean, it really is unique and incredible.
Drew Ford.
Nice. There you
go. So thank you, Drew. Well, what great job on that book for sure.
Agreed, man. I talked to Terry Beatty recently, and he'd be another great guy that I hope might be. And also, I want to get Max Allen Collins back. Max was one of my first Word Balloon interviews back in 2005.
He'd be fun.
Yeah, again, man, Ms. Tree, those great black and white crime comics were so important to me in my college years and my post-college years. And again, unfortunately, with the pandemic, they are still going to release, I know, a couple graphic novel collections and start really re-releasing the Ms. Tree stuff through the Hard Case Crime imprint.
That's interesting.
So I'm looking forward to those, and that's one of the reasons why. And also, Terry currently is doing the Rex Morgan comic strip. And I'm like, so what does Rex Morgan think of the pandemic these days? And he said, I don't know if I'm going to touch that or not. I wonder if his opinion had changed. It was very early in the virus time. So I don't know if that's changed or not, because he was really worried that, maybe people don't want to read. Right. I mean, isn't it interesting? I think a lot of people are like, oh, this period is really going to inspire a lot of things. I'm like, yeah, but I also kind of think it's like 9/11, where it's like, I mean, certainly since 9/11, I don't like reading and seeing fictionalized accounts of things that happened in 9/11. I'm like, yeah, that was just too tragic, man. I really want to, read other things and watch other things than revisiting that period myself. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, I can see both. I can see both points of view. I mean, it's fascinating, and we see such a small piece, like a fraction of this story right now. People will be unpacking this for the rest of our lives.
Oh, yeah.
I can't imagine the mountains of documentation that are going to exist after this. So,
yeah,
it's a funny thing with journalism. I think journalism is an industry that's gone through some interesting turns in the last couple of decades. Like the wealth of information that's available now, it's almost impossible to wade through. Like I really don't know how they do it, and maybe they don't. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, journalism that is struggling, and probably a lack of resources is part of that. But it feels like it's just so much information that it's hard to get a sense of it,
especially while it's happening. No, I hear you, and it is likely that once they have a chance to really sit down and think about what they covered, so we'll get a better picture for those that are willing to share. One more comment before we wrap up, Jim, and that's from Jose Sanchez. War stories are amazing. The Things They Carried is one of my favorite books.
Tim O'Brien.
Yeah. I ended up writing a war comic short. I'm a fan of that stuff too, and I always look for Star Spangled Comics and all those great DC comics of the war comics and stuff. Got to talk to Joe Kubert about a lot of his work on that. Not on the podcast, sadly. It was an after hours conversation, but really, yeah, man, I think a lot of that stuff is amazing. And also here another documentary, everybody, a French-made documentary about Jack Kirby's World War II exploits, and it's called Jack Kirby Goes to War. And I can't recommend it enough. Very interesting.
I've never heard of that. How long's that been out? Is that available?
Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime. It's like 3 or 4 years. Dude, that's how I discovered it. And I mean, again, Netflix always gets the big headlines. Amazon Prime always is calling these incredibly already made documentaries. They have Comic Book Confidential, that great 80s documentary.
John, we did a commentary on it. On Cartoonist Kayfabe. So you pop that in there, everybody. Watch it on Amazon Prime. Queue up our commentary, and you can hear us watching it along with you and remarking on it. And it comes back to what we're saying about let's document these people. Let's get their stories on video or on audio, because that's the remarkable thing when I watch Comic Book Confidential is like it's incredible to see Bill Gaines talking and being on video like that. And a lot of those older cartoonists where there isn't much footage of them, if any, it's just incredible to see them. So, that's part of the reason too, like get as many of these people as we can while we can still get them.
Again, Jim, we're barking up the same trees, because I did that with, oh God, and now I'm forgetting the title of the documentary, but Ken Viola's 1987 comic book documentary that Harlan Ellison narrated. It's on YouTube, everybody. And God damn it, I literally just had the guy on in the last month, but that was like literally 30 podcasts ago. But it includes Steve Ditko. Ditko wouldn't appear on camera, but he does a voiceover as Ken laid out a bunch of great Ditko pages. But it's Will Eisner, it's Kirby, Dave Sim, Frank Miller from '87, which is hilarious. Neil Adams. It's so great, and yeah, I mean, I had Tom King and my buddy Mike Cronenberg, who does a lot of work with the publisher of Back Issue, and now Tomorrow's. He does a lot of art design for Tomorrow's and stuff. And we talked about the documentary, and out of the blue, Ken Viola is like, "Hey, you were talking about my documentary. If you want, I'd be happy to tell you, what it was like making the thing." I'm like, "Yes, please. Good Lord, yes." So yeah, man, no, I'm with you. And again, it's getting these creators. Also, I talked to Rick Green, the guy from Prisoners of Gravity, the Canadian public television show. I'm glad you're nodding, Jim, because that is a great lost show that has so many interesting creators. And I was so pleased to talk to Rick. I put out the audio. I haven't put up the video yet. And I want to have Rick back because I didn't realize, beyond doing Prisoners of Gravity, he's a regular on the Red Green comedy sketch show from the late 90s. And also, he was a member of a comedy sketch group from Canada called The Frantics that Dr. Demento used to play their bits all the time when I was in college.
Wow.
And he's like, "Oh, yeah, when I was in The Frantics." And I'm like, "Oh, my God." I go, "I love The Frantics." I'm like, "I don't even know who I'm talking to." I'm like, "I just want to talk to you about your comic book show, for God's sake." So, you never know. And again, it's uncovering this stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that works.
I'm telling you. Well, dude, listen, I promised you I'd get you out at a reasonable time. And I thank you. This was a great conversation. And hey, seriously, Jim, I'd love to have you back sooner than later. I'm embarrassed that it's been so many years since you were on Word Balloon that, as always, I'm happy to help you promote Octobriana. There's still 3 weeks in the Kickstarter. I urge people to, all you have to do, everybody, and I'm even going to bring up a few pages of some of this incredible art that is inside the graphic novel. There she is, of course. And just hilarious, man. It sounds like a great story and some good Soviet fun in the spirit of Comrade what's the detective show called again?
Comrade Detective.
Comrade Detective. There we go, man. Absolutely. So no, beautiful art. I cannot wait to see this stuff in black light. And another really interesting project from Jim Rugg. So
and there's a level for everybody. If you mostly read comics on your iPad, I am now confident to deliver this thing digitally. So from $5 up, we'll get you this comic and check it out, man. Like John said, go to the Kickstarter. There's some videos. There's lots of images there, and find a level that works for you.
And Gregory is Ken Viola's Masters of Comic Book Art. That is the great documentary. You can listen to me and Tom talk about it, and Mike Cronenberg, and then also check out the Ken Viola interview that we did. It was only an audio interview, but it's up there in the Word Balloon feed as well. But
yeah, it sounds good.
Seriously, man, keep it up. Keep up everything that you're doing, both with the YouTube videos with that, and certainly your own projects. And yeah, man, please come back. It would be I want to touch base, and truly. I'm glad that we are now brothers in podcasting, and truly, I respect the hell out of what you guys are doing. And it's great to every now and then open up the hood and compare notes on the engine and everything. So I thank you.
I agree totally. Thanks for having me, John. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everybody, that's Jim Rugg, and I'll let him go, and I'll wrap up here. And thank everybody for watching tonight on Word Balloon. A lot of new people. I hope you'll stick around. I hope you subscribe. And check out more great Word Balloon lives that are coming up, and also pre-recorded interviews. And thank you to some of our usuals, like my dear buddy Dean Haspiel, who shall be doing his own Word Balloon in the days and weeks ahead. Let's see here. What else have we got? There you go. Thank you, Gregory, for putting up the Kickstarter link. So there it is. I'm going to leave it up for a second as I mentioned some of the great shows coming up. I was just talking to the heavy metal folks right now about their new direction for heavy metal, which still honors classic heavy metal. I can't stress that enough. But there's some interesting ideas that are coming from heavy metal, and I'll be discussing them with the brains behind that on an upcoming Word Balloon conversation. I hope you'll check it out. Last night, I started my conversations with Jeff Johns about Stargirl, and I hope you check those out. We'll be doing episode by episode looks. And there we go. The Steve Rude documentary available on Amazon was an interesting peek into his personal struggles. I agree. So that's excellent. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm going to wrap up, and thank you. And look for more Word Balloon on our Spreaker platform and on at wordballoon.com, my website, and right here on Word Balloon's YouTube channel and Facebook Live. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care.